Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into something ancient, something broken. We're heading to old Valyria, but not the gleaming empire of legend. No, tonight we walk through its ruins, the cursed peninsula where even dragons fear to tread. So before you get comfortable, take a quick moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights if you can, let the world outside fade into background noise, and breathe. Because tonight, we're walking into Valyria, where the ruins still sing, and something beneath the mountains has been waiting. Let's begin. Congratulations. You've just woken up in the smoking sea. The good news, you're standing on what was once the greatest civilization the world has ever known. The bad news, that civilization ended in fire, ash, and a curse that lingers in the stones, the air, and the very water beneath your feet. The smell hits you first. Sulfur. Thick and choking, like breathing in death itself. The sky above you isn't blue. It's a muted gray, stained with smoke that never clears. The sun, if you can call it that, hangs pale and distant, swallowed by the haze. The heat rises from below, from cracks in the earth that glow faintly red, as if the world is still bleeding from an ancient wound. You stand on blackened stone. Smooth, glassy obsidian stretches in jagged fields around you. Remnants of land that melted and cooled centuries ago. In the distance, broken towers rise like broken teeth from a shattered jaw. Spires that once kissed the sky now lean at impossible angles, half swallowed by the smoking sea. A body of water that bubbles and steams as if the ocean itself is boiling. The air's heavy, each breath burns your lungs. The silence is unnatural, broken only by the faint hiss of steam and the distant rumble of something deep below. No birds, no insects, no life. Welcome to Valyria, or what's left of it. Once this was the heart of the world, a place where dragon lords ruled the skies, where magic flowed like wine, where roads of fused stone stretched across continents, and slaves built monuments that defied the gods. But that world is gone, swallowed by the doom, and now only ghosts remain. Some say they're real, others say the ruins themselves remember. Either way, you feel it. The weight of something watching, something waiting. You take a step forward. The stone beneath your boot crunches. You look down. It's not stone. It's bone. The first rule of cursed Valyria. Nothing here is dead enough to stop moving. The second rule, you probably won't make it to sunset. You move carefully through the ruins, every instinct screaming at you to turn back. But there's nowhere to go. The smoking sea stretches endlessly in every direction, its surface roiling with unnatural heat. Islands of blackened rock jut from the water like tombstones. Some still glow faintly from within, as if the fire that destroyed them never truly died. The architecture around you is both beautiful and wrong. Valyrian stone, they called it, fused by dragon flame into shapes no normal masonry could achieve. Arches curve impossibly. Walls spiral upward without seams. Statues of dragons, sphinxes, and faceless gods loom over you, their features worn smooth by centuries of ash and wind. Some are cracked. Others weep a black, oily substance that pools at their bases. You pass through what must have been a grand plaza. The ground is covered in a fine layer of ash that never settles. It shifts with every breath of wind, revealing glimpses of mosaics beneath. Dragons in flight, scenes of conquest, faces frozen mid-scream. You try not to look too closely. Some of the faces seem to follow you. The craftsmanship is breathtaking even in decay. These weren't just builders, they were artists. Each column tells a story. Each archway frames a piece of sky like a painting. The Valyrians didn't construct, they sculpted. They took stone and fire and will, and created something that shouldn't exist. But now it's all broken, shattered. As if the gods themselves reached down and crushed it in their fists. You wonder what it must have been like in its glory. The streets filled not with ash, but with people. Nobles in silk robes, dyed colors that no longer exist. Slaves in simple tunics, their eyes downcast. Merchants hawking wares from distant lands. Children running between the pillars, laughing. Dragons overhead. Not the scattered few that Westeros remembers, but hundreds. Thousands, perhaps. The sky itself alive with wings and fire. But that's gone now, all of it, replaced by this hollow silence. In the distance, you hear it, a low, mournful sound, almost like singing, but not quite. It echoes off the broken towers, distorted and hollow. You can't tell if it's the wind or something else, something that once had a voice. The heat intensifies as you move deeper into the ruins. Vents in the ground release jets of steam that scald the air. You step around them carefully, but the heat radiates through your boots. The leather begins to warm, then to burn. Sweat drips into your eyes. Your throat is dry, but you have no water. And even if you did, you wouldn't drink from the streams here. The water runs black, thick with ash and something else. A shimmer on its surface, like oil, or poison, or both. You notice movement, just at the edge of your vision. A flicker of shadow darting between pillars. You freeze, listen, nothing. But when you turn your head, you see it again. Closer this time, a shape. Human? Perhaps once, but not anymore. The stories warn of the stone men, those who ventured too close to Valyria's curse and paid the price. Grayscale, they call it. A disease that turns flesh to stone, slowly, agonizingly. It begins with a patch of gray, rough skin, then it spreads, creeping up your arm, across your chest, until your joints lock, your face freezes, and your mind fractures. Some say the stone men still wander these ruins, not quite dead, not quite alive. Their bodies rigid as statues, but their eyes still moving, still aware. They cluster in the shadows of collapsed temples, reaching out with calcified hands toward anyone foolish enough to pass. One touch is all it takes, one brush of their stone fingers against your skin, and then the countdown begins. Days, maybe weeks, until you become one of them. Another statue in Valyria's eternal gallery of the damned. The shadow moves again. You hold your breath. It's closer now. You can see the outline. A figure, hunched and slow, moving with the deliberate patience of something that has all the time in the world. Because time doesn't mean anything when you're already half dead. You take a step back. Your boot scrapes against stone. The sound echoes. The figure stops. And then slowly, it turns toward you. You run. The ruins are not empty. Far from it. Fireworms still nest in the volcanic depths, serpentine creatures of living flame, eyeless and ancient, their bodies burning hot enough to melt through solid stone. They rise from cracks in the earth, drawn to movement, to warmth, to anything still alive. Sailors' tales speak of ships that ventured too close to the smoking sea, only to find these creatures coiling up from the water itself, wrapping around hulls and dragging vessels down into the boiling deep. But there are worse things than fireworms. In the poisoned waters, things swim, blind, pale creatures with too many limbs, fish twisted by centuries of magical corruption. Some say they were once human, slaves who dove into the sea to escape the flames, only to be changed by what they found below. And then there are the demons, that's what the sailors call them, winged shadows that circle the ruins at dusk. Some describe them as dragons, but wrong, malformed. Their wings tattered membrane, their cries distorted, as if their throats were filled with smoke and ash. Others swear they've seen things with faces almost human, but with eyes that glow like embers. Septon Barth wrote of vast and formless things moving beneath the earth, like worms through the corpse of a giant. He theorized that whatever the Valyrians dug up from the deep had never been fully destroyed, that it still writhed in the magma below, dreaming its alien dreams. You hear the sound again, that low, mournful singing. And this time, you realize it's not the wind. It's them. The things that still call this place home. The stories say the doom didn't just destroy Valyria. It changed it, twisted it. Those who survived the initial cataclysm, if any did, were warped by the fires and the poison and the broken magic that lingered in the air. But the true danger isn't what crawls through the ruins. It's what seeps into you. The air itself is cursed. Breathe it long enough, and you begin to change. Your skin blisters, your vision blurs. You hear voices that aren't there. You see things moving in the smoke. And then slowly, you stop being you. Grayscale, plague, madness. The doom left. Many gifts behind. You press on, because stopping means dying slower. You pass through a collapsed temple, its roof caved in, its altar split down the middle. Strange symbols cover the walls. Valyrian glyphs you can't read, but somehow understand. They speak of power, of blood, of the price paid for dragons. The altar is stained, dark marks that could be centuries-old blood or something else. Around it, the floor is scarred with circular patterns, ritual marks, places where candles burned, where sacrifices were made. The Valyrians didn't pray to their gods. They bargained with them. And when the gods stopped listening, they found other things to bargain with. Things that lived in the deep places, things that hungered. You move past the altar quickly. Something about it makes your skin crawl, as if the stone itself remembers what was done here, as if it's waiting for someone foolish enough to try again. In the silence, you begin to wonder, did Valyria fall because of hubris? Or because something beneath it finally woke up? The ground trembles, just slightly, just enough to remind you that this land is not stable, that the fires below never went out, that the doom is not over. It's simply waiting. You glance back the way you came. The path is already gone, swallowed by shifting ash and rising steam. There's no retreat, only forward, into the heart of what was once the greatest empire the world had ever known, and now the greatest graveyard. The ruins change as you walk deeper. The buildings here are older, more primitive. These weren't made with dragon flame and magic. These were built with hands and stone and sweat. The first settlements, before the dragons, before the power. It's strange to think that Valyria was once just a village, a handful of families living on a volcanic peninsula, scratching out a living from the harsh land. No different from 1,000 other forgotten settlements scattered across the known world. But then they found something, deep in the mountains, deep in the dark. They found dragons, or perhaps the dragons found them. The accounts differ. Some say the Valyrians discovered dragon eggs in the volcanic chambers beneath the 14 flames. Others say they learned to blood bond with wild dragons through ancient rituals. Still others whisper that the dragons were always there, waiting, and that the Valyrians were chosen. Chosen to ride, chosen to rule, chosen to burn. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. A small village became a city became an empire, and an empire became a nightmare wrapped in gold and fire. You pass what must have been a market square. Stalls line the edges, their wooden frames long since rotted away. But the stone foundations remain. You can almost see it. Merchants calling out their wares, the smell of spices and roasted meat, the sound of coins changing hands, but now there's only ash, and the faint metallic scent of old blood. Something catches your eye. A statue, smaller than the others, tucked into an alcove. It depicts a woman holding a child. Both are frozen in stone, their faces worn smooth by centuries. But there's something about the posture, the way the woman's arms wrap around the child. Protective, desperate. This wasn't a statue. This was a person, two people, mother and child, caught by the doom and turned to stone where they stood. You step back. Suddenly the ruins feel different, less like a graveyard and more like a tomb. Not for the empire, for the people who lived here, the ones who didn't ask for power, who didn't bargain with ancient forces, who just wanted to live. They died anyway. All of them. The weight of it settles on your shoulders like the ash that falls endlessly from the gray sky. This wasn't just the fall of an empire, it was the death of a world. You keep walking. What else can you do? The heat grows more intense. The ground beneath your feet is warm now, hot even. You can feel it through your boots. Steam rises from cracks in the stone, creating a haze that makes it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. And then you see it. A building that's still mostly intact. A tower, slender and tall, rising from the ruins like a finger pointing at the sky. Or perhaps like a warning. The entrance is open, a gaping mouth of darkness. Every instinct tells you to turn away. But curiosity, that terrible human weakness, pulls you forward. You have to know, you have to see. You step inside. The air's cooler here. The walls block the heat from outside. But they also block the light. You stand in near total darkness, waiting for your eyes to adjust. Slowly shapes emerge, stairs spiraling upward. Walls covered in carvings, more glyphs, more stories. You begin to climb. The stairs are steep and worn. In some places, they've crumbled away entirely, forcing you to jump across gaps that drop into darkness. You don't look down, you keep climbing. The carvings change as you ascend. At the bottom, they showed scenes of daily life. Farming, building, simple pleasures. But higher up, they show something else. Ritual, sacrifice, dragons being born from flame and blood. And at the very top, just before the stairs open onto what must have been an observation platform, the carvings show the doom. Mountains exploding, cities falling, people fleeing, dragons burning. And beneath it all, something rising, something vast, something formless. The fire made flesh. You step out onto the platform and the world opens up around you. From here, you can see the full extent of the ruins. Miles and miles of broken stone, the smoking sea stretching to the horizon. Islands that were once mountains, channels that were once streets. It's beautiful in a terrible way, like looking at a corpse and noticing how peaceful it seems. But then you see movement. Far below, in the ruins, shadows moving between the buildings. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The stone men, the fireworms, the things that swim in the poisoned waters, all of them drawn, here, all of them waiting. For what? For you. The singing grows louder, no longer distant, all around you. Rising from the ruins like a prayer, or a summoning. You understand now. This isn't a graveyard, it's a trap. Valyria doesn't just kill, it claims, it transforms, it adds to itself. And you've walked right into its heart. The way down seems longer than the way up. Each step echoes, each shadow seems to move. You don't run though you want to. Running in the dark is how you fall, and falling here means dying slowly. When you finally emerge from the tower, the ruins seem different, more hostile. The shadows deeper, the singing louder. You need to leave, now. But which way? The paths all look the same. The landmarks have shifted. Or perhaps you've simply lost your bearings in this maze of broken stone and ash. You choose any direction, and you walk. Long before your footsteps echoed through these cursed ruins, another walked here, a girl, a princess. Her name was Valyria Targaryen. She was young, barely more than a child, but she carried the blood of old Valyria in her veins, and with it, a longing she could not name, a restlessness, a pull toward something lost. Valyria had always been different. Born in 42 AC to Prince Aegon Targaryen and Princess Rhaena, she entered a world of political turmoil. Her father, Aegon the Uncrowned, was the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, but his uncle Maegor the Cruel had seized it through violence and terror. Her childhood was spent in hiding, moving from castle to castle, never staying long enough to call any place home. Her mother, Rhaena, held her close, whispering stories of dragons and glory, of a throne that should have been her father's. But Valyria never knew her father. Aegon the Uncrowned died in battle against Maegor when she was still an infant, killed in single combat at the battle beneath the God's Eye. His dragon, Quicksilver, fell with him, shattered by Balerian's black fire. Balerian, the same dragon that would one day carry Valyria to her doom. After her father's death, her mother remarried. Twice. First to her own brother, as was Targaryen custom, though that marriage was never consummated. Then to Andro Farman, a lesser lord who resented living in the shadow of dragons. Valyria grew up watching her mother chase ghosts. Rhaena collected dragon eggs like other women collected jewelry, desperately hoping one would hatch. She surrounded herself with favorites and companions, building a court of her own since the Iron Throne had been denied her. But Valyria wanted none of it. She didn't want court politics or careful alliances. She didn't want to be a pawn in someone else's game. She wanted freedom. She wanted the sky. While other noble girls learned to embroider and sing, Valyria learned to climb walls and pick locks. While they dreamed of knights and marriage, she dreamed of dragons and distant lands. She would sneak away from her lessons, exploring every castle they stayed in, finding secret passages and hidden rooms. Her mother couldn't understand her. Rhaena wanted her daughter to be proper, dignified, a true Targaryen princess. But Valyria was wild, uncontrollable. She asked too many questions, challenged too many rules, refused to accept that her life was already planned out for her. When King Maegor died and Jaehaerys took the throne, everything changed. Jaehaerys was Arya's cousin, young and desperate to heal the wounds Maegor had left. He needed heirs, he needed stability, and he made a decision that would alter Arya's life forever. He named her his heir, bypassed his own younger brother to place Arya in the line of succession, Suddenly, this wild girl who'd spent her childhood in hiding was Princess of Dragonstone, next in line for the Iron Throne. She was 11 years old. They brought her to King's Landing, gave her tutors and guards and ladies-in-waiting, tried to shape her into a queen. But Arya had tasted freedom, and now they were putting her back in a cage, even if this cage was gilded. She hated it, hated the formality, the bowing and scraping, the endless lessons on history and law and proper behavior. She felt like she was suffocating, drowning in silk and ceremony. And then there was the matter of marriage. She was betrothed to her cousin, Prince Jaehaerys's brother, a political arrangement, a way to keep power in the family. No one asked Arya what she wanted. No one cared. She began to rebel. Small things at first, skipping lessons, insulting courtiers, wearing riding leathers instead of dresses. But it wasn't enough. The walls were closing in. And then everything changed again. Jaehaerys's wife, Queen Alysanne, gave birth to a son. Suddenly, Arya wasn't the heir anymore. She was disposable. The betrothal was quietly dissolved. She was sent back to her mother. She should have been relieved, but instead she felt hollow, used. She'd been a placeholder, a tool, and now she was being discarded. Her mother took her to Fair Isle, to the seat of House Farman, her new husband's family. It was beautiful there, peaceful, safe, everything Arya should have wanted. She felt like she was dying. The restlessness grew worse. That pull in her blood, that Valyrian longing, became unbearable. She would stand on the cliffs and stare east, toward the sunrise, toward lands she'd never seen, toward Valyria. She didn't understand it then, didn't know what it meant, just knew that something was calling her, something in her blood, something that wouldn't let her rest. And then Balerion came to Fair Isle, the Black Dread, the largest dragon that had ever lived, the mount of Aegon the Conqueror, the last dragon to have seen Valyria before the Doom. After King Maegor's death, Balerion had been riderless. He came and went as he pleased, and one day he came to Fair Isle. Arya saw him circling above the castle, black wings blotting out the sun, and she knew. This was her chance, her only chance. She didn't plan it, didn't prepare, just acted. She climbed the castle walls, scaled the rocky cliffs, and found where Balerion had landed. The dragon was resting, his enormous bulk stretched across the stone like a living mountain. She should have been terrified. Balerion had killed her father's dragon, had served the cruel King Maegor, was large enough to swallow her whole without noticing. But she wasn't afraid. She felt drawn to him, as if they recognized something in each other. Two creatures that didn't fit, that were too wild, too old, too full of fire. She approached slowly. The dragon's eye, large as a wagon wheel, tracked her movement. He could have killed her with a breath. Instead, he waited. She reached out, touched his scales. They were warm, ancient, scarred from battles she couldn't imagine. And then she climbed, up his foreleg, up his shoulder, into the saddle that had been made for Aegon the Conqueror himself. The dragon keepers tried to stop her. They shouted warnings. They ran toward her with nets and chains. But Balerion was already moving. His massive wings unfurled, black as night, spanning wider than any building. One beat, and they were airborne. 2 beats, and Fair Isle fell away behind them. 3 beats, and they were gone. Arya laughed. For the first time in years, she laughed. Pure joy, pure freedom, the wind in her hair. The world spread out below like a map. And ahead, nothing but sky. She didn't command Balerion to fly east. She didn't need to. The dragon knew where he was going, had always known. He'd been waiting for someone to take him home, to Valyria. The journey took months. They flew over Essos, over lands Arya had only read about in books, the free cities, the Dothraki Sea, the Shadowlands, places that grew stranger and darker the further east they went. Balerion hunted for their food. Dragons don't need to eat often, but when they do, they eat large. Arya watched him take down horses, cattle, even a young elephant once. She learned to cook what she could over his flame, learned to sleep in the saddle, learned to become part of the dragon. But as they flew east, Balerion changed. He grew more agitated, would circle for hours before landing, would wake suddenly in the night, looking toward the horizon with what almost seemed like fear. Arya felt it too, that pull in her blood growing stronger. But now it was mixed with something else. Dread. as if part of her knew what was waiting, knew what she would find, but she couldn't turn back, wouldn't. The pull was too strong. And then one morning, she woke to find the sky gray, the air thick with sulfur, the ocean below them boiling and steaming. They had reached the smoking sea. Balerion hesitated. For the first time in their journey, the dragon resisted. He circled the edge of the cursed waters, unwilling to go further. But Aerea urged him on, just a little further, just to see. The ruins appeared through the mist like a fever dream. Broken towers, collapsed domes, the skeletal remains of what had been the greatest city in the world. And Aerea felt it, that pull, stronger than ever, coming from somewhere in the heart of the ruins, calling her name. They landed on the edge of the city. Balerion would go no further. He crouched low, trembling, every instinct telling him to flee. But Aerea dismounted. She had to know, had to see. She walked into the ruins alone. The heat was unbearable, the air thick and poisonous. But she pressed on, through plazas filled with ash, through temples with collapsed roofs, following that pull, that singing in her blood. She found passages leading down, into the earth, into the dark, and she followed them. Balerion waited above, hour after hour, until he could wait no more, until something drove him to follow, to find his rider. What happened in those deep places, no one knows for certain. Aerea's ravings gave fragments, glimpses, but the full truth died with her. She spoke of finding a vast hall beneath the earth, of columns that weren't stone but flesh, of a ceiling that pulsed like the inside of a throat, of singing that came not from mouths but from the rock itself. She spoke of something vast, something that moved, something that saw her, and she spoke of the moment she understood, the moment she realized what the Valyrians had found, what they had been mining, what they had been feeding with their blood magic, a prison, not for demons or dragons, but for something older, something that had been sealed away before humans existed, before dragons, before gods. And the Valyrians had been digging into it for centuries, bleeding it, harvesting its power, weakening the chains until the chains broke. Aerea tried to run, but it was too late. The things in the deep, the fireworms and worse, they entered her, not to kill, not to feed, but to escape, to use her as a vessel, to flee the thing that was waking beneath Valyria. Balerion found her and pulled her out, but they were both changed, both marked. The dragon bore wounds on his hide that shouldn't exist. Aerea bore things inside her that should never have lived. They flew west, slowly, painfully, taking over a year to return. And when they finally reached King's Landing, they were both dying. The court's reaction was horror. When they brought Aerea inside, when the maesters saw what was happening to her, strong men fled the room. Queen Alysanne wept. King Jaehaerys ordered the chamber sealed, allowed only the maesters and Sept and Barth inside. They tried everything, ice baths, leeches, prayers, potions. Nothing worked. The things inside her were beyond their medicine, beyond their understanding. And Aerea screamed, for days, until her voice broke, until she had no voice left, just silent screaming, her body convulsing. The things inside her trying desperately to escape, but finding no escape. In her final hours, between the screams, she whispered fragments, warnings, but by then, her mind was breaking. The fever, the pain, the knowledge of what she'd seen. It was too much. When she finally died, it was a mercy. They burned her body immediately, and forbade anyone from speaking of what they'd seen. But the warning remained, carved into Targaryen history, written in Sept and Barth's secret accounts. Valyria is not dead, and it does not forgive, but Aerea wasn't the last to venture into these cursed waters, not the last to believe they could succeed where others failed. Decades after her death, another soul would sail east, not on dragonback, not driven by Valyrian blood, but by something equally powerful. Hope. His name was Geryon Lannister, and he was looking for a sword. Geryon was the youngest brother of Lord Tywin Lannister, the most powerful man in Westeros. Where Tywin was cold and calculating, Geryon was warm and reckless. Where Tywin saw duty, Geryon saw adventure. Where Tywin built an empire of fear and gold, Geryon dreamed of distant horizons and forgotten treasures. He was a disappointment to his brother, and he knew it. While Tywin ruled Casterly Rock with an iron fist, Garyon explored the world. He sailed to the Summer Isles and learned their music. He traveled to Bravos and studied with the Bravos. He visited the free cities and collected stories like other men collected coins. But always, always he heard the whispers about Valyria, about the treasures lost in the Doom, about the Valyrian steel swords that lay unclaimed in the ruins, waiting for someone brave enough to reclaim them. And Garyon wanted one sword in particular, Bright Roar, the ancestral sword of House Lannister, lost 3 centuries earlier when King Tommen II's Lannister sailed to Valyria and never returned. A blade of Valyrian steel, priceless beyond measure, a symbol of Lannister pride that had vanished into the smoke and ash. Tywin would never admit it, but the loss of Bright Roar haunted House Lannister. Every other great house had their Valyrian steel. The Starks had ice, the Mormonts had Longclaw, the Tarleys had Heartsbane. But the Lannisters, the richest family in Westeros, had nothing but gold. Gold cannot buy Valyrian steel. Tywin had learned that lesson bitterly. He'd offered fortunes for such blades, offered anything. But the few families who possessed them would never sell. So Garyon decided he would find one instead. In 291 AC, he announced his intention. He would sail to Valyria, he would search the ruins, and he would return with Bright Roar, restoring glory to House Lannister. Tywin called him a fool, told him he was chasing ghosts, that Valyria had claimed better men than him, that he would die for nothing and leave his daughter fatherless. Garyon smiled and said, "Perhaps, but at least I'll die doing something interesting." He commissioned a ship, the Laughing Lion, painted in Lannister crimson and gold. He assembled a crew, adventurers and treasure hunters, men with nothing to lose and everything to prove. He stocked the ship with supplies for a year-long voyage, and on a warm summer morning, he sailed from Lannisport. His daughter Joy, only a child then, watched from the docks. Garyon waved to her, his smile bright, his spirit unshakable. He promised he would return, promised he would bring her back stories of dragons and ruins and treasures beyond imagination. It was the last time anyone in Westeros saw him alive. The voyage east was long, months of sailing through familiar waters, then into the strange currents near Valyria. The crew grew nervous as they approached. The water changed color. The air grew thick. The sky took on that familiar gray. But Garyon pressed on. He'd come too far to turn back now. They reached the smoking sea on a morning when the mist hung so thick you couldn't see the bow from the stern. The water bubbled and steamed around them. The ship's hull groaned as if the wood itself was afraid. Some of the crew wanted to turn back, said they'd heard singing in the night, said they'd seen shapes moving beneath the water, said the ship's compass spun wildly as if north no longer existed. But Garyon laughed. That's what he did. He laughed in the face of fear. It's what made him different from his brother. Tywin conquered fear through control. Garyon conquered it through joy. "We've come all this way," he told his crew. "Just a little further, just to the edge, just to see." They sailed deeper into the smoking sea. The ruins appeared through the mist like a fever dream. Broken towers, collapsed domes, the skeletal remains of what had been the greatest city in the world. And somewhere in those ruins, Garyon believed, lay Bright Roar. He took a landing party ashore, 20 men, armed with swords and crossbows and whatever courage they could muster. They left the ship anchored in relatively clear water, with orders to wait 3 days. If the landing party didn't return by then, sail west. Don't look back. The men on the ship watched as Garyon and his crew disappeared into the ruins. That was the last anyone saw of them. 3 days passed. The landing party didn't return. The ship's captain waited an extra day, then another, hoping against hope. But on the 6th day, when supplies ran low and the crew began to panic, they raised anchor and fled. They made it back to Lannisport, barely. Half the crew was dead from strange fevers. The others were changed, haunted. They spoke of dreams, of singing, of shapes in the mist that looked almost human. But of Garyon and his 20 men, there was no sign, no bodies, no wreckage, nothing. Just silence. Years passed. Joy grew up without her father. Tywin never spoke of his brother, but those who knew him well said the loss cut deeper than he'd ever admit. The Laughing Lion was never seen again, and Bright Roar remained lost. But stories began to circulate, sailors' tales, whispers in dockside taverns. Some said they'd seen a ship matching the Laughing Lion's description, drifting in the smoking sea with no crew aboard. Others claimed they'd heard laughter echoing from the ruins on foggy nights, laughter that sounded like Garion's. One sailor, half mad from fever, swore he'd seen a man standing on the ruin's edge, a man in Lannister crimson, waving as if beckoning ships closer. When they sailed near, the figure vanished. Another claimed he'd found a message carved into driftwood that washed ashore in Volantis, just 2 words in the common tongue: "Don't follow." But the most disturbing tale came from a Braavosi captain who swore that while passing near Valyria during a storm, he saw lights in the ruins. Not firelight, not torchlight, but a soft red glow like embers, and moving among those lights, shapes that walked upright, that moved with purpose, that might have been human once. The captain said he trained his spyglass on the ruins and saw them clearly. Men, or things that had been men, moving through the broken streets in a procession, searching. And at the front of the procession, carrying something that gleamed even in the dim light, walked a figure in rotted crimson and gold. The captain never sailed near Valyria again. Did Garion find Brightroar? Did he venture too deep into the ruins, like Aerea before him? Did he touch something he shouldn't have? Or did he simply disappear into the smoke and ash? One more fool swallowed by Valyria's hunger? No one knows. But sometimes, on quiet nights in Lannisport, people say you can hear laughter on the wind, distant, echoing, the kind of laughter that Garion was known for, the laughter of a man who faced death with a smile. Or perhaps it's something else wearing his laughter like a mask, something that learned to mimic human joy to lure others closer. Because that's what Valyria does. It takes what makes us human, our courage, our curiosity, our hope, and uses it against us. It shows us what we want most. It promises that just a little further, just a little deeper, we'll find what we're looking for. And then it claims us. Garion wanted to restore his family's honor, wanted to prove he was more than Tywin's disappointing brother, wanted to give his daughter a legacy worthy of the Lannister name. Instead, he gave Valyria one more ghost to add to its collection. One more warning that no one heeds, because there will always be another Garion, another dreamer who believes they'll be different, that they'll succeed where countless others failed, that their courage or cleverness or desperation will be enough to overcome the curse. And Valyria waits for them all with the patience of something that is already won. The sword Brightroar is still out there, somewhere in the ruins, perhaps lying in a collapsed tower, perhaps clutched in stone fingers, perhaps at the bottom of that pit where the singing comes from, surrounded by all the other treasures that drew fools to their deaths. Or perhaps there is no sword, perhaps there never was, perhaps the real treasure of Valyria is the lesson, and we keep failing to learn it. Some doors should stay closed, some treasures are not worth the price. Some questions should remain unanswered, but we never learn, we never do. Because hope is a dangerous thing, more dangerous than greed, more dangerous than ambition. Hope makes us believe we can be the exception, that we can beat the odds, that we can walk into the darkness and come back unchanged. Hope is what killed Garion Lannister, just as surely as it killed Aerea Targaryen, just as surely as it killed King Tommen the Second Lannister 3 centuries before, just as surely as it will kill whoever comes next. And there will be someone next. There always is. Valyria knows this. Valyria counts on it, so it waits, patient, hungry, singing its song to anyone foolish enough to listen. And somewhere in those ruins, among the ash and bone and broken stone, something might be wearing Lannister crimson. Something might be carrying a sword that gleams like captured sunlight. Something might be searching, endlessly searching, for a way home that no longer exists. Or perhaps Garion found what he was looking for. Perhaps he's standing in that vast hall beneath the earth that Aerea described. Perhaps he's listening to the singing stone. Perhaps he's finally understood the mystery he spent his life chasing. And perhaps, in that understanding, he learned why some mysteries should remain unsolved. The water rocks the ship gently. You're far from Valyria now. But its shadow follows. Its memory clings like the ash that you still taste in your mouth. You think about Garion, about his smile, his laughter, his absolute certainty that he would succeed. And you wonder, what did he feel in those final moments? When he realized he wasn't going home? When he understood that Valyria had claimed him like all the others? Did he regret it? Or did some part of him, even at the end, still smile? You'll never know. No one will. That's Valyria's final cruelty. It doesn't just take lives, it takes stories, it takes endings, leaves only questions and shadows and the fading echoes of laughter that might be wind or might be something worse. The ship sails on through the darkness, west, away from the cursed peninsula and its broken promises. But you can't help glancing back, just once, just to see. And for a moment, you swear you see lights in the distance, red lights, moving in formation, searching. But when you blink, they're gone, just your imagination, just the tricks that Valyria plays on everyone who gets too close. You turn away, face west, toward home, toward safety, toward a world that makes sense. But in your dreams that night, you hear it, laughter, distant and echoing. The sound of a man who found what he was looking for and wishes he hadn't. The sound of Valyria welcoming another fool to its eternal collection. But even before Geryon sailed east with hope in his heart, even before Arya flew on Balerion's back, someone else tried to reclaim Valyria. His name was Aurion, and he believed he could succeed where the Freehold had failed. The story of Aurion is brief, because like all who ventured to Valyria after the Doom, he left few traces, just whispers, legends, and silence. Aurion was a dragon lord, not of the Freehold itself, but of Qohor, one of the free cities founded as a Valyrian colony. When the Doom came, when the 14 flames exploded and Valyria fell, the colony survived. Cut off from the homeland, suddenly independent, they scrambled to establish their own power. Qohor had a dragon, just one, but one was enough to make them formidable, and Aurion was its rider. He was ambitious. Some accounts describe him as young, hungry for glory that had been denied him by birth. He'd been born in a colony, not the Freehold itself. A lesser dragon lord, but now the Freehold was gone, and Aurion saw opportunity. In the chaos following the Doom, he proclaimed himself emperor, not of Qohor, not of a single city, but of Valyria itself. He would reclaim the ruins, rebuild the Freehold, restore the Empire. It was madness, of course, but it was also brilliant. The Valyrian colonies were in chaos. The Freehold had been their center, their source of unity and power. Without it, they were fragmenting, fighting among themselves, each city trying to claim supremacy. Aurion offered them a vision, a return to glory, a new Freehold rising from the ashes of the old. And people believed him. He gathered an army, not just from Qohor, but from across the free cities. Soldiers, sellswords, adventurers, people who'd lost everything in the Doom and wanted revenge, or justice, or simply something to believe in. The accounts differ on the size of his army. Some say thousands, others say tens of thousands. What's certain is that it was substantial, a force large enough to conquer cities, large enough to reclaim an empire. Or so Aurion believed. He marched east, his dragon flying overhead, his army following behind, through lands still reeling from the Doom's aftermath, through regions where ash still fell from the sky like snow, through territories claimed by no one because everyone was dead. They reached the smoking sea, and Aurion didn't hesitate. He would cross it, would reclaim Valyria, would plant his banner in the ruins of the Freehold, and declare himself emperor of a new age. His army followed, some willingly, some because they'd come too far to turn back, some because the dragon flying overhead didn't give them a choice. They crossed the smoking sea, ships and barges carrying thousands of men into cursed waters. The water boiled around them, the air burned their lungs. Men began to sicken immediately, but still they pressed on, because Aurion promised them glory, promised them treasure, promised them a place in history. They reached the ruins, landed on the peninsula, and marched inland. And then, nothing. Aurion and his entire army vanished. Completely. Utterly. Not a single soldier returned. Not a single ship made it back to report what happened. They simply disappeared into the ruins as if Valyria had swallowed them whole, which perhaps it had. No bodies were ever found, no wreckage, no signs of battle, just silence. The free cities waited for news. Days became weeks, became months. Merchants stopped trading east, ships avoided the smoking sea. And slowly people stopped asking what happened to Orion, because they knew, everyone knew, Valyria had claimed him, just as it claimed everyone else. But legends persist, sailors' tales, stories told in dockside taverns after too much wine. Some say Orion's army reached the heart of Valyria, that they found treasures beyond imagining, gold, Valyrian steel, dragon eggs. They loaded their ships with riches and prepared to return home. But the ruins wouldn't let them leave. The ships wouldn't sail. The dragons wouldn't fly. They were trapped. And one by one they died. Grayscale, madness, or something worse. Others say the army turned on itself, that the cursed air drove them mad, that they fought each other in the ruins, killing and dying until none remained, that if you sail close enough to the peninsula, you can still hear them. The sound of swords clashing, men screaming, dragons roaring. But the darkest tale is this: Orion succeeded, that he reclaimed Valyria, that he crowned himself emperor in the ruins of the freehold, that he rules there still, sitting on a throne of melted stone, commanding an army of the dead, that he waits in the ruins for others to join him, that anyone who enters Valyria becomes part of his eternal empire, alive but not living, dead but not resting, trapped forever in service to a mad emperor who refuses to accept that his kingdom is a graveyard. The story of Orion became a warning, not just about the physical dangers of Valyria, but about ambition itself, about the hunger for glory that blinds us to reality, about the refusal to accept that some things are truly lost. The free cities never forgot. For generations afterward, when someone proposed a foolish plan or chased an impossible dream, people would say, "Don't be an Orion." It became an idiom, a cautionary phrase, a reminder that some ambitions are graves we dig for ourselves. But the warning didn't stop others from trying, didn't stop Arya from flying east, didn't stop Geryon from sailing toward the smoking sea, won't stop whoever comes next, because humans are stubborn. We see failure and think, but I'll be different. I'll succeed where they failed. I'll be the exception. And Valyria waits, patient, hungry, adding each new fool to its collection. Orion was the first after the doom, the first to believe he could conquer the ruins, the first to learn that Valyria cannot be conquered. Because Valyria doesn't just destroy bodies, it destroys dreams. It takes ambition and twists it. It takes hope and corrupts it. It takes the very things that make us human and uses them to lure us to our deaths. Orion wanted to be emperor, wanted his name remembered for eternity, wanted to achieve something no one else could. And perhaps he got his wish. Perhaps he is remembered, not as an emperor, but as a warning, a name whispered in dread, a story told to frighten the ambitious, a reminder that some crowns are not worth wearing, because they're made of ash and bone and broken dreams. And somewhere in the ruins, in the deep places where the singing never stops, perhaps Orion still sits on his throne of melted stone. Perhaps his dragon still circles overhead, its wings tattered, its fire cold. Perhaps his army still marches through the empty streets, searching for an enemy that doesn't exist. Or perhaps there's nothing left at all, just ash scattered by the wind, just another ghost in a city of ghosts. Either way, the lesson remains. Valyria does not forgive, Valyria does not forget, and Valyria always wins. But how did it come to this? How did the greatest civilization in history, a place of magic, dragons, and unmatched power, become a smoking graveyard that devours anyone foolish enough to enter? The answer, like all great tragedies, begins with ambition. Valyria was not always an empire. Once, it was just a small settlement on a volcanic peninsula. Shepherds and farmers living in the shadow of smoking mountains. They had no magic, no dragons, no power beyond what their hands could build, and their will could sustain. The land was harsh. The soil, volcanic and mineral rich, grew strange crops. The air smelled of sulfur even then. The mountains rumbled and occasionally spat fire. It was not a place anyone would choose to live unless they had nowhere else to go. And that's exactly what the first Valyrians were. Refugees, outcasts, people fleeing something worse than volcanic fire. They settled on the peninsula because no one else wanted it. Because it was the edge of the world. The place where you went when you'd run out of places to run. They built simple homes from volcanic stone. They learned to read the mountain's moods, to know when the ground would shake and when it would be still. They developed a culture around the fire, worshipping it, fearing it, respecting it. For generations, they were nothing special, just another forgotten people in a forgotten corner of the world. But the people there discovered something beneath the earth, something ancient, something powerful, dragons. The accounts differ on how this happened. Some say a shepherd boy followed a strange sound into a cave and emerged riding a dragon. Others say a woman fleeing from raiders hid in the volcanic depths and found eggs warming in the magma, eggs that hatched in her hands. The oldest accounts, the ones written in Old Valyrian that few can still read, tell a different story. They say the dragons found the Valyrians, that the dragons had been waiting, sleeping in the deep places beneath the mountains, waiting for the right people to arrive. People desperate enough, hungry enough, willing to pay the price. Because dragons, the old texts say, are not animals. They are fire, made flesh. And fire demands fuel. Fire demands sacrifice. The first dragon riders, according to these accounts, didn't tame the dragons. They made a pact with them. Blood for power, life for flight. The dragons would serve, but the Valyrians would feed them. Not sheep, not cattle, but something more valuable, souls. But whether by chance or design, once the Valyrians had dragons, everything changed. With dragons came fire. With fire came dominion. A single dragon could burn an army. A flight of dragons could level a city. And the Valyrians had dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. They conquered the known world, not through mere strength, but through flame. They burned the Giscari Empire, the oldest civilization in Essos, burning it so thoroughly that it never recovered. They destroyed the Rhoynar water mages, boiling their sacred river until the fish died and the people fled. They crushed the Andal kingdoms, scattering the survivors west to Westeros. And with each conquest, Valyria grew. More slaves, more gold, more power. They built roads that spanned continents, roads of fused stone that never cracked or weathered. They forged weapons that never dulled, armor that never broke. They raised towers that defied gravity, structures that seemed to float in the air like frozen dreams. The Valyrian Freehold, they called it, a republic of dragonlord families, each controlling their own dragons, their own slaves, their own fortunes. They competed with each other constantly, but they also cooperated, because together they were invincible. They enslaved entire peoples to mine their mountains and build their monuments. The slaves came from every corner of the world. Giscari, Rhoynar, Andals, Sarnori, peoples whose names are now forgotten. They worked in the mines, in the forges, in the great construction projects that remade the landscape. And they died, by the thousands, by the tens of thousands. Their bones mixed with the stone they cut. Their blood fed the fires that smelted the ore. They became part of Valyria itself, literally built into its foundations. The slaves were not people to the Valyrians. They were tools, resources, fuel for the great machine of empire. When they wore out, they were replaced. When they died, their bodies were thrown into the volcanic vents to feed the fires. Some slaves were marked with tattoos denoting their purpose. Miners had black marks, builders had red, pleasure slaves had gold. Each had their place, each had their use, each was property. But power demands fuel, and Valyria's fuel was blood. The 14 flames, massive volcanoes that ringed the Valyrian peninsula, were not natural, or rather, they had been hollowed out, reshaped, turned into mines where slaves dug endlessly into the earth, extracting gold, silver, and something far more dangerous, fire-touched stone. This ore, this strange metallic substance found only in the volcanic depths, could only be smelted by dragon flame. The heat from normal forges wasn't enough. It required dragon's breath, sustained and focused, to melt the ore and separate the precious metal within. And what metal it was. Valyrian steel, light as a feather, sharp enough to cut through iron like cloth, unbreakable, imbued with spells and blood magic that made it more than mere metal. But the steel was only part of it. The deeper they dug, the stranger things they found. Chambers carved by no human hand, tunnels that descended far beyond what made sense. And at the deepest levels, things that defied explanation. The miners spoke of finding chambers where the air itself shimmered with heat, even though no fire burned, of discovering carvings in languages that predated human writing, of hearing sounds in the darkness singing, breathing, the slow, steady rhythm of something vast inhaling and exhaling. But the Dragon Lords didn't care. They wanted more gold, more power, more magic. So the Valyrians dug deeper, always deeper. They used blood magic to keep the fires contained, to keep the mountains stable, to keep the dragons breeding. The rituals grew more complex, more demanding, more terrible. They carved spell runes into the volcanic stone. They sacrificed thousands in elaborate ceremonies. They poured blood into channels cut into the mountain's heart, blood that hissed and boiled on contact with the stone, as if the mountain itself was drinking it. The 14 flames became the beating heart of their empire, literally. The mountains themselves were said to breathe, to pulse. The ground trembled in rhythm, like a heartbeat, as if something vast and alive slept beneath them. And perhaps it did. The blood magic required constant feeding. Slaves at first, then prisoners of war, then criminals, then anyone the Dragon Lords deemed expendable. The definition of expendable grew broader with each passing year. Some families specialized in the dark arts, the blood mages of House Valeris, the shadowbinders of House Vagar, the flesh sculptors of House Coharis, who could reshape living bodies like clay, creating monsters for their amusement. The rituals grew more elaborate, more demanding, more destructive. They bound demons to their will. They created chimeras by fusing different animals together. They experimented with extending life, with transferring consciousness, with breaking the very laws of nature. And with each sacrifice, with each spell, with each act of hubris, the thing beneath the mountains stirred. Slowly, like a sleeper waking from a dream that had lasted millennia. The ground trembled more frequently. The volcanoes grew more active. Strange lights appeared in the deep mines, lights that shouldn't exist. The slaves reported seeing things moving in the darkness, things that were neither human nor animal. But the Dragon Lords didn't listen. They were too powerful, too confident, too certain that their magic could control anything. They were wrong. No one knows exactly what triggered the doom. The accounts that survive are contradictory, fragmentary, written by people who weren't there or who fled before the end. Some say the blood mages grew too confident, delving into powers they did not understand. They found texts, fragments of knowledge from civilizations that existed before even the Long Night. Civilizations that had risen and fallen so long ago that only whispers remained. Civilizations that had discovered powers that should have remained hidden. These texts spoke of things that existed before the world was made, of forces that shaped reality itself, of beings that dwelt in the spaces, in the hot darkness beneath the world's skin. The Valyrians thought they could harness these forces, thought they could bind them to their will just as they'd bound the dragons. They were wrong. Others say rival factions within Valyria sabotaged each other's spells, unraveling the magic that held the flames in check. The Dragonlord families were constantly at war, not with swords but with intrigue and sorcery. House Targaryen feuded with House Velaryon over trade routes. House Baelaris schemed against House Coharis over mining rights. House Vagar plotted to absorb House Aurion through marriage and assassination. Perhaps one family decided to eliminate their rivals. Perhaps they created a spell designed to collapse their enemies' minds or weaken their dragons. Perhaps they didn't realize that destroying their enemies meant destroying themselves. Perhaps they unraveled one thread of magic without realizing the entire tapestry would come apart. Still others whisper of something darker, that the Valyrians woke something that should have remained asleep, that all their mining, all their blood magic, all their arrogance, finally penetrated to a place they should never have reached. And what they found there was not a source of power, it was a prison, and they broke it open. The oldest legends, the ones dismissed as myth even by the Valyrians themselves, spoke of the first inhabitants of the world. Not humans, not even the children of the forest or the giants. Something older, something that existed when the world was young and hot and formless. The Valyrians called them the fire-made flesh. Others had different names. The Giscari called them the unburning. The Rhoynar called them the first flame. The Shadowlands called them by no name at all, because to name them was to invite their attention. These beings, the legend said, had been imprisoned beneath the mountains at the dawn of time, chained by gods or heroes or powers now forgotten, sealed away because they could not be destroyed. And the Valyrians, in their endless digging, in their endless hunger for power, broke those chains. But on that day, the day the world changed, every volcano erupted at once. Not in sequence, not one by one, simultaneously. At precisely noon, under a clear summer sky, all 14 flames exploded with a force that split the earth. The sound could be heard in Yitai. The shockwave shattered windows in Volantis, 300 miles away. Mountains collapsed inward. The ground beneath the greatest city in the world simply fell away, swallowed by a sea of magma. Entire districts vanished in seconds. The great palace of the Freehold, with all 40 families gathered for a summer festival, disappeared into the earth. Thousands of dragon lords, the most powerful sorcerers in the world, died before they could even scream. Great towers that had stood for thousands of years melted like candles. The Valyrian roads, unbreakable and eternal, cracked and buckled. The harbor, filled with ships from every corner of the world, boiled. The ships burned, the sailors burned, the water itself burned with a fire that wouldn't die. Dragons fell from the sky, their wings seared to ash before they could react. Some tried to flee west, some tried to fly above the flames. None succeeded. They dropped like burning stars, adding their fire to the inferno below. The ocean itself rushed in to fill the void, turning instantly to steam. The resulting explosion could be heard 1,000 miles away. Ships in the summer sea were capsized by the shockwave. Coastal cities as far as Westeros felt the tremor. In Old Town, the Citadel's tallest tower swayed and nearly fell. The sky turned black, not with night, but with ash, a darkness that would last for years, spreading across the known world. Ash fell like snow from the Jade Sea to the Sunset Sea, burying fields, poisoning wells, choking animals and people alike. Summer turned to winter in a day. Crops failed worldwide. Famine spread. Entire cities starved. Plagues followed the famine. It's estimated that 1 in 4 people in Essos died in the decade following the doom. Not from the disaster itself, but from its aftermath. And then came the fires. Not normal fire. Fire that burned wrong. Fire that clung to stone and flesh alike. Fire that would not die no matter how much water you poured on it. Fire that seemed alive, seeking, hunting. Survivors who fled the initial eruption found themselves pursued by flames that followed them across the water, as if the fire itself was alive and hungry. Ships ignited spontaneously, miles from shore. Islands that had been untouched caught fire from below, from the seabed itself. The sea itself began to smoke, boiling from heat that rose from below. Fish died in the millions, floating belly up in water too hot to touch. The death of so much life created plagues of its own. The smell of rotting fish hung over the coast for years. And in the chaos, the magic broke. Whatever spells the Valyrians had woven to control their power, to bind their dragons, to shape the world itself, they shattered. And the consequences rippled outward like cracks in ice. The dragons went mad, all of them, all across the world. Dragons in Korth turned on their masters. Dragons in the free cities burned their own nests. Dragons in Westeros, the few that existed, fled to the wilderness and were never seen again. Except for the Targaryen dragons. Safely distant on Dragonstone, they survived. Traumatized, changed, but alive. As if whatever destroyed the others couldn't reach that far. Or chose not to. Plagues spread from the ruins. Not natural diseases, but afflictions twisted by broken magic. Grayscale appeared for the first time, or perhaps returned from some ancient past. The Red Death, the Pale Mare, the Bronze Fever. Diseases that didn't just kill but transformed, leaving their victims something less than human. Creatures warped. The fireworms grew larger, more aggressive. Driven mad by the chaos, things emerged from the deep that had never been seen before. Things that should never be seen. Sailors reported monsters in the smoking sea. Serpents the size of ships. Things with too many heads. Things that walked on land but breathed underwater. The very air became poison. Those who survived the fires found themselves choking on fumes, their skin blistering, their minds unraveling. Some went mad immediately, tearing at their own flesh, screaming about voices in their heads. Others declined slowly, losing themselves piece by piece until nothing human remained. Valyria didn't just fall, it was unmade, erased, turned from the pinnacle of human achievement into a wound in the world that would never heal. Some scholars believe the doom was not a natural disaster at all, but a deliberate act. Whispers from old Volantis speak of a conspiracy among rival Dragonlord families, a faction that sought to end Valyria's dominance by breaking the spells that contained the 14 flames. They thought they could control the destruction, thought they could ride the chaos to power, thought they would be spared. They were wrong. Others point to the faceless men of Braavos, whose order was founded by slaves in the mines of Valyria. The first faceless man, they say, was a slave who heard the prayers of dying men, prayers to 1,000 different gods in 1,000 different languages, all asking for the same thing: death, release from suffering, freedom from slavery, an end to pain. And one day, the first faceless man prayed to all those gods at once, and something answered, not with words, but with a gift of death. The faceless men deny involvement in the doom, but they also don't deny it. When asked, they simply smile and say, all men must die. But perhaps they also say, some deaths are gifts, some deaths are mercy, some deaths are necessary. Did they collapse Valyria? Did they spend centuries preparing, learning the magic, finding the weak points in the spells that held the flames in check? Did they strike simultaneously, 100 faceless men sabotaging 100 different rituals? Or is it simply convenient to blame them? To imagine that human hands caused the disaster, rather than admit that Valyria destroyed itself through its own hubris? We'll never know. The faceless men keep their secrets, and the truth died with Valyria. But the darkest theory comes from fragments of Valyrian texts recovered from Dragonstone, from the libraries of old families who left before the doom. They speak of something the Dragonlords discovered deep beneath the mountains, something they called the fire made flesh. The texts describe it in contradictory ways. Some say it's a creature, others say it's a force. Still others say it's neither and both. A thing that exists outside the normal rules of reality. A thing that dreams in fire and hungers for the world above. One text, written by a blood mage of House Baleris, describes an expedition to the deepest levels of the mines, to a place where the rock itself glowed red with heat, where the air was too hot to breathe, where you had to wear special masks just to survive. They found a chamber, vast, circular, with walls that seemed to pulse, and in the center, something that moved, something that breathed. The blood mage wrote, "It is not alive as we understand life. It does not think as we understand thought. It simply is, and it is vast beyond comprehension. We have been digging into its flesh for centuries, bleeding it, harvesting its power. And it has allowed this, but it is waking now, and when it fully wakes, nothing will remain." The text ends there. The blood mage presumably died in the doom, along with everyone else who knew what they'd found. The Valyrians, in their arrogance, believed they could control it, harness it, use its power to fuel their empire forever. They were wrong. When the 14 flames erupted, survivors spoke of seeing shapes in the fire, silhouettes the size of mountains moving through the smoke, of hearing sounds that were not screams, but laughter, deep rumbling laughter that shook the earth, as if something ancient and terrible had finally been set free, as if something had been caged for eons and was finally awake, as if it was stretching, flexing, remembering what it meant to move without chains. What remained was a wound in the world, a place where the natural order no longer applied, where the dead did not rest, where the very stones remembered agony. The smoking sea became a barrier, a warning. Sailors who ventured too close spoke of strange lights beneath the waves, moving in patterns that suggested intelligence, purpose, hunger. Ships vanished without a trace, their crews never found. Some washed ashore weeks later, the sailors dead, but unmarked, their faces frozen in expressions of terror, or worse, wonder. Voices called from the ruins. Some sailors reported hearing their own names spoken by something that sounded almost human. Others heard singing in languages that predated human speech. Still others heard nothing but felt watched, as if invisible eyes followed their ships across the water. The smoking sea still bubbles and steams, 4 centuries later. The ruins still glow at night, pulsing with a rhythm that some say matches a heartbeat. Ships still vanish without explanation, swallowed by waters that should be mappable, navigable, safe. Because whatever woke beneath Valyria did not die in the doom. It simply stopped pretending to sleep. The Targaryens, who had fled Valyria before the doom, carried the memory of their homeland like a scar. They spoke of it in hushed tones. They dreamed of its glory, but they never returned. Danis, the dreamer, had seen it coming. 12 years before the doom, she dreamed of Valyria burning. She dreamed of the mountains exploding. She dreamed of dragons falling from the sky like burning stars. She dreamed of something vast rising from beneath the earth, something that wore fire like skin. She told her father, Lord Enar Targaryen, and unlike most who hear prophecies, he believed her. He packed up his household. He took his 5 dragons, his wealth, his family, and he fled west to a dreary island in Blackwater Bay that no one wanted, Dragonstone, a place of smoking volcanoes and dark stone, but stable, safe, far from whatever was coming. The other Dragonlord families mocked him, called him Enar the Exile, coward, fool. They laughed at his paranoia. A few even tried to seize his holdings in Valyria after he left, dividing his estates among themselves. They were still there when the doom came, still laughing, still confident in their power. And then they were ash. After the cataclysm, the Targaryens were alone, the last Dragonlords, the last family that remembered what Valyria had been. They carried that weight for generations, the knowledge that they alone survived because they alone had listened. Some Targaryens, in later years, dreamed of returning, of reclaiming their homeland, of rebuilding what had been lost. But they never went. Something always stopped them. A warning dream, a sense of dread, or simply the knowledge passed down through generations that Valyria was no longer a place for the living. King Jaehaerys, the Conciliator, once proposed an expedition. He wanted to recover Valyrian texts, artifacts, knowledge that might be preserved in the ruins. His sister wife, Queen Alizanne, forbade it. She had dreamed of Valyria, she said. And in her dream, the ruins were not empty. Something lived there still. Something that remembered the Targaryens. Something that was waiting for them to return. Prince Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, claimed he would fly to Valyria on Caraxes and prove the fear was superstition. He never went. Some say he lost his nerve. Others say Caraxes refused to fly east, no matter how hard Daemon commanded. The dragon knew. Dragons always know. Even Aegon the Conqueror, who burned Harrenhal and conquered Westeros, who feared nothing and no one, never spoke of Valyria except to say, "What happened there is done. We are what remains, and we will never go back." And perhaps that's the truest epitaph for the doom. Not a dramatic proclamation, just a quiet acknowledgement that some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. Because Valyria is not dead. It is waiting. Waiting for the next fool who believes they can reclaim what was lost. Waiting to remind the world that some powers should never be touched, some depths should never be explored, and some fires once lit can never be extinguished. The lesson of Valyria is simple, written in ash and bone and melted stone. Ambition without wisdom is destruction. Power without restraint is annihilation. And hubris, the belief that we can control forces beyond our understanding, always ends the same way, in fire. So rest now. Let these stories remind you of the price of hubris, of the danger of digging too deep, of the things that wait in the dark places of the world, patient and hungry. And when you wake, remember, Valyria was the greatest civilization the world had ever known. It commanded dragons. It reshaped continents. It conquered death itself. And still, it fell. Not because it was weak, but because it touched something it should never have awakened. The ruins still smoke. The sea still boils. The stone men still wander. And deep below, in the hollowed mountains and magma-filled halls, something vast and formless still dreams of the sky. Valyria is not a graveyard. It is a warning. And the warning is simple. Some doors should never be open. Some fires should never be lit. And some places should be left to the dark. So rest now. Let the stories comfort you. And when you wake, remember, some lights refuse to die. Leave a light before you go, and return soon for more tales from Westeros. Till then, stay warm. Good night.